IGN has been one of the biggest names in game reviews for years. And hey, we all make mistakes. They just happen to make a whole lot more of them. Whether trashing a masterpiece or overhyping a blockbuster that aged like fine milk. Some of their reviews are so bad it makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, they're bad at this. So, set your faces to cringe as we dive into 10 times IGN got it completely wrong. There's no time to waste, let's jump in. Kicking things off with Doom 2016, a game we can all agree falls into the 7 out of 10 range, right? Right? Well, keep your pants on because this is still just the first game here. So yeah, IGN scored Doom from 2016 a 7.1 out of 10. This was back when they were still giving out tenths of a point for some reason. And remember, while IGN says a 7 is good, it's really just average when you look across all of their reviews. So with a score of 7.1, IGN is essentially saying that Doom 2016 is just average.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
They criticized the game for not sticking to the FPS conventions of the time, like cover-based mechanics and regenerating health. And yeah, that was sort of the point. Doom rejected these overused standards to deliver a more balls-to-the-walls run-and-gun experience, taking us back to the series' roots and reminding us why we fell in love with Doom to begin with. Penalizing the game for not adhering to common tropes missed the point of its design philosophy. It intentionally upended what had become the norm to deliver something fresh, like how glory kills encouraged you to play as aggressively as possible by rewarding close quarters combat with health pickups. And it was freaking glorious. Their review downplayed this mechanic, almost like they didn't understand how it worked, or the essential way it propelled the game's pacing and strategy. The push-forward combat philosophy meant you couldn't just hide behind cover until your health filled back up. You're the motherfucking Doom guy, and the minions of hell were gonna fear you. What they didn't downplay was the game's multiplayer. You know, that thing no one cared about? Well, IGN apparently cared a lot. Like, a lot, with a huge portion of the review being focused on it. And admittedly, the multiplayer was underwhelming, but most would agree that this focus disproportionately weighed down the overall score. Outside of IGN, Doom 2016 was almost universally acclaimed, with tons praising its single-player campaign and overall design. I'd never expect any outlet or reviewer to match the broader consensus 100% of the time. Lord knows I've been out of step a time or two, but IGN is so out of step so often that it's hard not to question the consistency and criteria of their review standards.
Doom is like two separate games. The single player is nostalgic to a fault, dealing heavily in a satisfying, if straightforward, sort of chaos. But the multiplayer tries to meld Quake 3 style map design with Call of Duty style loadouts, failing to capture the elements which make either game grossly addictive.
Okay, Deadly Premonition is weird. Like really weird. It looks like a PS2 game, even though it came out on the PS3 and 360. The gameplay is mechanically rough, and the characters are, well, like this.
Mrs. Olivia Cormack, I am here for Mr. Stewart's lunch. If it is ready, I'd thank you a bunch.
So yeah, I wouldn't expect it to appeal to everyone, and it's without a doubt the most polarizing game on this list. But even if you weren't a fan of Deadly Premonition, you probably didn't think it deserved a goddamn 2. Here's how they describe a 2. Let's face it, anything worse than bad is a train wreck. Worse than awful? That's kind of impressive. Not only are these games not fun, but they're outright infuriating or insulting. This score is considered so harsh that IGN has given a 2 or lower fewer than 0.5% of the time. Their review focused mostly on the game's technical side, like outdated graphics, clunky controls, and subpar sound design. Yeah, okay, Deadly Premonition isn't exactly a technical marvel, but that completely disregards the game's narrative depth, the rich character interactions, and surreal atmosphere. feeling like a Twin Peaks fever dream. Honestly, those quirks are what made the game memorable, and why so many, myself included, love it so much. IGN's review totally overlooked how these aspects contributed to the game's unique charm and enduring appeal. With a score this low, it pulls the overall average down and turns people away. It's a shame that because of this review, so many people will never experience Francis York Morgan and his interactions with Zack, conversations with insane side characters, or solve the Raincoat Killer mystery. This is another example where IGN can't seem to wrap their heads around games that don't strictly adhere to conventional standards. Sure, a game should work properly, but what about artistic vision and how it makes you feel? Deadly Premonition is simultaneously a technical mess and surreal masterpiece. In no way am I arguing the game should have received a 10 out of 10, even if I absolutely loved the game, but it's by no means a 2 either. Deadly Premonition has become the definition of a cult classic. It's flawed in many ways, but it makes up for it with unmatched charm that's as strange as it is compelling.
It's a video game that's so off the wall and random that it feels like it was created by an online meme generator.
1 turkey, strawberry jam, and cereal sandwich.
Alright, sometimes games have too much water. If you know, you know. Yeah, this is one of IGN's most infamous reviews. In their 2014 review of Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, a single phrase in its summary, "too much water," became a meme that's endured for more than a decade. In my video about games criminally underrated by IGN, I can't tell you how many people asked why I didn't include this review. But actually, I think the review overall and the score were generally pretty fair, with a 7.8. They praised the game's visuals and online functionality, while also criticizing certain elements, like the overabundance of water-type Pokemon and the reliance on water-based routes. And yeah, while some agreed with the point about repetitive water routes, a lot of people thought the focus was strangely overblown. But where things exploded was the phrase, "too much water," as a bullet point in the review's summary. Oh man, people lost their freaking minds, mocking IGN relentlessly to this very day. It's become a sort of symbol for how trivial game reviews have become, with IGN leading the way. What's funny is the meme became so big that even the Pokemon Company later referenced it. Just last year they put out an article, "Water versus Land, a debate for the ages." Which, yeah, is kinda dumb, but also still pretty funny. This is nowhere near the most egregious sin to come out of IGN. The last in the list hold that honor. But it highlights the dumbing down of discourse surrounding real game journalism, and why so many no longer trust big outlets for honest and thoughtful reviews.
Even if annoying problems still exist, like the overabundance of water in both terrain and Pokemon.
I'm bummed out about the middling reviews for this next game, since it means we'll likely never get a sequel. When The Order 1886 was revealed, the gaming world went bananas. No one had seen visuals like this before, and the world was so strange and intriguing, with Knights of the Round Table fighting werewolves in the late 1800s. Like, hell yeah, that sounds awesome. But when the game released, many were disappointed. It's hard for any game to live up to the levels of hype that we're building for this game. And excessive hype can lead to excessive disappointment, a topic I've covered before. But it was the lackluster reviews that really sealed it for many. IGN gave the game a 6.5, and while that's not an awful rating, anything below a 7 will turn people away. So many who were excited never even picked it up. The most common criticism was the game's short length. It'll take around 7 to 8 hours to finish the game, and I get it. You plop down full price for a new release and maybe get a solid weekend out of it? Yeah, that can be disappointing for sure. But as you'll see, IGN is very selective about their criticisms of game length and value.
Leonard! A drink! A drink, goddamn you!
Their review also criticized other aspects like pacing, gameplay, and linearity, describing the shooting as disappointingly generic. And while there are legitimate criticisms, their review didn't fully appreciate the game's world. the cinematic feel to the entire presentation, with visuals that had never been seen before on consoles. The cover-based shooting was elevated by the retro-futuristic arsenal that not only added spectacle, but encouraged you to experiment with different methods for dispatching enemies. The game wasn't very long, but the world it established ignited the imagination. It was clear the developers had big plans for a franchise that will never see the light of day because of overly narrow reviews like the one from IGN. I give IGN a lot of shit for scoring good games too harshly, but the pendulum swings the other way too. Sometimes they're overly generous with their scores. Suspiciously so. And even more suspiciously is how often this is the case when it comes to Nintendo. Yeah, like their review of Star Fox Zero. Their review was very positive, with a decent rating, but that was in stark contrast with the rest of the gaming world. The game was pretty universally trashed for awkward motion controls and underwhelming design. Look, Nintendo is great, but they aren't perfect and don't always hit the mark. And Star Fox Zero is the rare example of a total misfire. So, a 7.5 isn't an amazing score, but it does push the game above average. They commended the stage design and boss fights, but completely overlooked the fatal flaw in the game's design. The overly complex control system required you to divide your attention between the TV and the Wii U gamepad, using motion controls for aiming and analog sticks for movement. This simply didn't work, and made for a very frustrating experience. And for those die-hard Star Fox fans who just wanted a fun new entry were thoroughly disappointed. As noted by Polygon, the game forces you to use the screen on the gamepad to play the game from a constricted cockpit view. And since the missions, storylines, and mechanics so closely mirror those of previous entries, other than the terrible controls, there was very little fresh material to experience, which is why this game and IGN's review fell woefully short.
Star Fox Zero's fun stages and impressive boss fights gave me lots of reasons to jump back in and play them over and over, especially in co-op until I got a hang of juggling two screens myself. Learning to use the unintuitive controls is a really difficult barrier to entry, though it comes with a payoff if you can stick with it.
Thanks, Star Fox!
Let's ratchet things up a bit more with IGN's bafflingly glowing review of MadWorld. This was a Wii exclusive developed by one of my favorite studios, Platinum Games. So I remember very vividly the marketing for it and my growing excitement as I eagerly awaited its release. It didn't look anything like your typical Nintendo console exclusive, with its aggressive black and white aesthetic and comically over-the-top carnage, with splashes of bright crimson. And I'd be lying if I said it wasn't fun doling out the pain. For a while. The problem is just how long that while lasts. The game's only about 4 hours long, and you'll be all funned out well before the credits roll. The repetition sets in early and sets in hard because of the limited moveset and environmental kills that quickly revealed a serious lack of depth. Oh, and remember when motion controls were shoehorned in places they don't belong? Come on, your mom knows all about that. And so does MadWorld. The controls were just so infuriatingly imprecise that you couldn't help but feel like an idiot as you wildly flailed your arms. And don't even get me started on the camera that just loved to get stuck in the worst possible positions. You know, like your mom. And I'm not sure if it's because of how basic the combat system was, but IGN loved MadWorld, giving it a 9 out of 10. A 9 means it was amazing, an enthusiastically recommended game, one that will last the test of time. And that's exactly what didn't happen. Yeah, there's a reason we don't have a bunch of sequels, and no one's singing the praises of MadWorld these days. So yeah, the game looked cool and delivered a couple hours of fun carnage, but a 9? Really? They said the game's length didn't significantly factor into the overall score. But, I find that really strange considering I remember them criticizing an 8-hour game for being too short. In the end, this game was little more than a brief, shallow diversion.
All things considered, MadWorld is one of the most stylish, gory, and funny games I've played, and one of the great beat-em-ups of our time.
Can we go even higher? I think we can. So 9 out of 10 is an incredible score for any game, but a 10 out of 10? Well, that should be reserved for only the best games ever made, the reflection of a true masterpiece. Since that's the score they gave to The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, you'd have to assume it represents the pinnacle of gaming. And while I think most Zelda games are fantastic, and this one's decent, it had some major issues that should have prevented it from getting such a high rating. When it was released, there was palpable excitement. It happened during the motion control craze, before we learned not everything is better with motion controls. So the promise of using your Wiimote to slice your way through Hyrule just like Link himself sounded nothing short of incredible. And with the newly released Wii Motion Plus, the controls would be better than ever for combat and puzzles. The problem is the motion controls kinda sucked. They were inconsistent and frustrating. Combat often demanded precise movements that the hardware struggled to register accurately, leading to drawn-out battles and fatigued gamer arms. And this is made all the worse by the clunky world design, with long, linear stretches punctuated by tons of backtracking. Bafflingly, IGN praised both of the game's biggest flaws. They touted the world design, but gushed about the motion controls. They must really love doing this. Nintendo even recognized the game's fundamental flaws and made big changes to The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD that came out on the Switch. Most notably was the ability to play without motion controls, and a bunch of quality of life improvements like fast travel to prevent so much backtracking. So, was Skyward Sword a terrible game? No. I mean, I can't think of any bad Zelda games. There were a few, but Skyward Sword wasn't one of them. That doesn't mean it was a 10 out of 10. It was a solid game with some big flaws, and according to their own criteria, it should have been a 7 out of 10.
It's not enough to say this is the best Zelda game of all time. This redefines the implementation of motion controls, proving that the right application can make a difference. This is the first game in Wii's lifespan to completely and thoroughly prove that Nintendo is right, that non-traditional controls can forever change how we want to play games.
Okay, in fairness, IGN's inflated scores aren't just for Nintendo. They gave Kane Lynch 2 Dog Days a 7 out of 10. Oh, that doesn't blow your fucking mind? Okay, this will take a bit of explanation. Where to even start? So, this is the sequel to Kane Lynch Dead Men from 2007, a gritty co-op shooter featuring the titular mercenaries, Kane and Lynch, who were forced to work together after being freed from prison by a criminal organization. It wasn't anything to write home about, but was a good time and a solid start to a franchise. Kane Lynch 2 took everything good from the original and took a big ol' lo-fi dump on it. The gunplay felt like ass, sluggish and imprecise. Enemy AI was inconsistent, alternating between dumb as a box of rocks and clairvoyant with pinpoint precision. The levels were mostly narrow corridors with wave-based enemy setups that became monotonous very quickly. The gritty, lo-fi aesthetic that mimics YouTube-quality handheld footage, complete with digital compression, flickering lights, and sensor bars, was migraine-inducing, and it was only 3 hours long. which I guess was a good thing to prevent more migraines. And while I'll be the first to say that quantity doesn't mean quality, but that should factor into the value offered for a full-priced game, especially when 8 hours is too short, apparently. By awarding it a 7, IGN gave the impression that this was a competent if flawed shooter, when in fact it was a highly divisive, unfun, and often unpleasant experience that left most players disappointed. A more honest score would have landed the game in the 4 to 5 range.
But if you're looking for something darker and more sophisticated content-wise than your usual shooter fare, then Kane Lynch 2 might just be the thing.
What's the worst Resident Evil game? No, not that one. Whoa, I forgot about that one. Okay, let me just tell you, Resident Evil 6 is regarded by many as the best example for the series losing its way. It had moved so far from its survival horror roots that it was almost unrecognizable, with big, bombastic set pieces, quippy one-liners, and dumbed-down, overly streamlined mechanics, but without the thoughtful design choices and horror elements that a game like Resident Evil 4 was able to balance. IGN awarded the game a 7.9 out of 10, and that didn't sit right with most people. IGN praised the visuals, but almost completely overlooked everything else. They actually said it was among Capcom's greatest successes, with an incredibly strong world, lighting, and creature designs. This focus on aesthetics didn't take into account critical gameplay flaws and schizophrenic design. Action was ramped up without any tension or stakes. Puzzles were almost non-existent. And the characters? Well, the characters have always been a bit rough throughout the series.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
A lot of people hate this game, and while I'm not among them, I'll fight anyone who says it's better than Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Okay, IGN, I guess we're fighting. Capcom completely rebooted the series with RE7 because of the disastrous reception RE6 received from most. But clearly, if it were up to IGN, we'd have more generic action than horror in our survival horror games.
At its core, there is still a great zombie-filled adventure to be had here.
Okay, I saved the worst for last, and this really is about as bad as you can get. Of course, I'm talking about IGN's review for Dead Cells. Oh yeah, we're going there. If you're not familiar, Dead Cells is a roguelike Metroidvania game from 2018, where you play as a prisoner who must fight his way out of a diseased island in order to slay the island's king. The levels are procedurally generated, so each run is a fresh challenge. And while there's a permadeath system, as you'd expect, the overarching progression using cells to buy permanent upgrades is continually satisfying, coupled with tight gameplay, awesome pixel art visuals, an addictive loop, and Dead Cells is one of the very best of the genre. Now, it wasn't like IGN gave this nearly flawless game a middling review. No, they'd never do that, right? No, they gave Dead Cells a well-deserved 9.7 out of 10. And the review didn't focus on the amount of water or game length or anything like that. In fact, the review was fantastic, really capturing the spirit of the game perfectly. The problem was, the review wasn't theirs. It was actually from a small gaming outlet called Boomstick Gaming. Let me explain. You see, the writer from IGN, Philippe Musin, who I can only assume starred in all of those cold commercials, plagiarized almost word for word Boomstick Gaming's review. Now, if you've never heard of Boomstick Gaming, well, that's kind of the point. Philippe likely assumed no one would notice he stole from a small gaming channel. Yeah, he didn't think they'd put up a video titled IGN copied my Dead Cells review, What Do I Do?, where they covered the theft beat for beat, and definitely didn't think it would get over 100,000 views in 24 hours, as well as getting picked up all over the place, including major news sites. You can totally see why. Check this out.
This combat system is fast, fluid, responsive, and one of the most rewarding representations of 2D combat of the entire genre.
fights are fast, fluid, responsive, and hands down one of the most gratifying representations of video game combat I've ever experienced.
So it's starting to get a little fishy, huh? Also in place is a mutation system that has you pick from various buffs that can enhance and alter your abilities, but
system, which adds another layer of diversity to how you can play. This is where you can choose from various buffs that enhance and alter your abilities.
Alright, stellar writing, Philip. Dead Cells only falters slightly with some repetition setting in, especially on the early areas and during longer play sessions.
Dead Cells does falter slightly with some repetition, but it's only felt in its earlier areas and during the extended play sessions.
To IGN's credit, when this came out, they fired the Mucinex guy almost immediately.
There goes the neighborhood!
Issued an editor's note with an apology, and had a different writer, Brandon Tyrell, put out a new review for Dead Cells. And while that might be where the story ends, it's not how it started. When digging in further, it became clear that mucin and plagiarism go together like peas and carrots. Well before he started at IGN, and throughout his time there, this dude was stealing left and right. He was just like
the Sticky Bandits.
This dude stole from Nintendo Life, Engadget, Polygon, NeoGAF, and the list goes on. Of course, the internet went bananas looking over his past reviews and finding all sorts of similarities with other sources. It's just a shame IGN didn't put in this legwork before letting him represent them. And that's why this was the time IGN got it the most wrong. And there you have it. 10 times IGN got it completely wrong. Some of these games are now cult classics, while others became infamous for all the wrong reasons. But now I want to hear from you. What are the biggest misfires and scandals in the world of game reviews? If you liked the video, hit like and of course subscribe. And if you want to see games that were criminally underrated by IGN, check out my video right here. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
And for everything else, stick with IGN.